by sharing someone's experience and helping them through a difficult time, you're not going to be empathic towards them without sharing in the pain. So every time he talks about the end of suffering, it just sort of bothers me when you get these kind of books, because you hope, like, oh good, somebody's going to finally say it the right way. And I guess we could disagree with a little bit of what anybody might say, but you kind of hope that you're going to say it right from page 1 to the last page. But in this case, I think he's kind of doing what he says he's not going to do. I mean, his intent is to get us engaged with the reality of God's Spirit. So for him to be imposing his view, either Buddhist, Hindu, whatever, that suffering is to be, shunned and avoided, and everything is about living above suffering, and that's all Christ wanted, was for us to end suffering. But he's really imposing his own view into what is now supposed to be this objective view of who Christ is. And so he's bringing his own perspective, kind of what Ken Wilber talks about, that we need to kind of ward against. He's bringing his own perspective into his study, much like people criticize Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and any other writer of Christian scriptures, that their own viewpoint ends up being how they present supposedly Christ's words. Frustrating, isn't it? Well, the good news is you can get it straight from Christ himself if you just open yourself up to it. Now people say, well, then how do you know what you're hearing or what you're perceiving in the Spirit is God? Okay, you'll make mistakes, but the truth of God and his love to bring us into a full understanding and enlightenment will bring us through those mistakes. So you're not going to be forever doomed to be making the wrong choice because you don't have a Bible to run your ideas across. In fact, that's kind of a silly notion itself, isn't it? People consider the Word, the Bible, the Word of God, front to cover, even though there's a zillion translations and different interpretations, and some manuscripts are considered authentic and some aren't, and on it goes. But that's another story. We've been talking about that for 8 years. Let's move on. If you haven't caught it, I'm sorry, we're moving on. So the trick, in fact, is to take Jesus literally, he says. After centuries of theology, our minds find it difficult to consider him without the trappings of a Messiah. When he says, I'm the way, truth, and light, the capital letters aren't just a holdover from archaic form of English, they're Jesus' patent on God. Yet the light is your own consciousness here and now in the messy present tense. If you think about going to a movie this afternoon, that thought came from the light. The same is true if you're thinking about your next meal or sex or how to stop smoking. What makes Jesus so difficult for us to grasp is that he never veers away from the purity of the light. He has no choice. God consciousness creates its own reality. I often think that we are incredibly fortunate to have as much understanding of Jesus as we do. He could just as easily have been dismissed as insane. Well, okay. Again, we're going to disagree with Deepak on something. That's fine. I think it has nothing to do with the light necessarily. That thinking of going to a movie this afternoon is, a thought that comes from the light. Based on what? It could just be your own emotions. You're trying to avoid. Avoid talking to someone today, so and I'm not necessarily thinking of that, it's just kind of repressed, but So really you should talk to that person, but you're kind of repressed. You're not really thinking about that. So you're thinking, gee, how can I enjoy myself today? Oh, I'll go to watch a movie. That's coming from the light? How? On the other hand, it could. It could be the light of God has something special for you in a certain movie and you go because of that. But just to say that whatever it is you do, whether it's movie, sex, or stop smoking or eating your next meal, no. But in the sense of Jesus, he says here, what makes Jesus so difficult for us to grasp is that he never veers away from the purity of the light. That I agree with, and I think that's why why our religions have done just a miserable job of presenting Jesus, because to live in the knowledge and the reflection of Jesus continually, or to even grasp something so transcendent, or to even approximate it, or even to catch a glimpse of it enough to want only the purity of the light to be ever present with you in all your actions, is a truly suffering event, because you have to turn away from the patterns of mind and behavior that you've developed up until this point to just be this reflection of holiness. I mean, that's why monks are monks, and some of them stay away from society. The only way you're going to tame that is to get away from people. Or the easier way, I should say. And I think largely Christianity has just failed at that, and the evil forces of the world or the universe have prevailed in, equating Jesus with the bastardization that is historical Christianity for the most part. Because the true Christ is just nowhere to be found. And even if someone were to explain him, people don't want him because their lives are what they are. My life is what I want it to be. What do you mean? The pure Christ of the light doesn't want me to live my life the way I want to live? I have no use for that. Right? Isn't that what people say? It's what people don't want to hear about Jesus. All right. The Besnard Lakes. I'm going to add this to my iPod. Thank you, people. Try, for example, to understand his famous saying, resist not evil. Over the years, this teaching has become diluted. It has been watered down into a kind of compassionate passivity, a way to walk away from bullies instead of fighting back. By turning the other cheek, we feel morally superior because we haven't added to the violence in the world, even when provoked. But the relevant passage from the New Testament is even more radical. You've been taught an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but I say don't resist evil. If someone hits you, let him hit you twice. If someone sues you in court to get your coat, give it to him and your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go a mile, go two. If someone asks you for something, give it to him. If he wants you to borrow money, don't turn your back. Or if he wants to borrow money. These dictates seem completely unworkable. An eye for an eye, the teaching that Jesus wanted to overturn, remains much easier to follow. The moment someone's branded as evil, the natural reaction seems to be revenge. We assume that, despite Jesus' urgings, we have every right to exact punishment. The current war on terror is based on this notion, yet any form of fighting against contradicts Jesus, a fact that right-wing Christian hawks conveniently ignore. Resist not evil, and that's kind of what I was just saying. It's the true Christ, even Christians are really interested in him. Resist not evil, if carried out in real life, would lead to a society of forgiveness. Horrendous notion. If we went around forgiving everyone, either the evil people would completely take over, dominating us, or they might forgive us in return and stop being evil. The second option, which Jesus perhaps had in mind, is unthinkable, if not crazy. To demonstrate that resist not evil isn't insane, Jesus lived out his own teaching. He submitted to an unjust trial, persecution, and finally a violent death. Christians worship him for doing so, since it led to the resurrection. Surrender proved to be his ultimate weapon. But the fact that he is worshipped for not resisting evil hasn't carried the day for us ordinary mortals. We continue to live, by and large, by the very law he preached against, an eye for an eye. The missing element, as always, is consciousness. You can't live by resist not evil without being in a higher state of consciousness. Fortunately, to the extent that you rise toward God consciousness, evil withdraws, leaving you invulnerable.